Welcome to another GUI-XT video tutorial. Today we will show how the SAP Query tool and GUI-XT can be combined to display additional information within an SAP transaction and thus improve the efficiency of decision-making for the user. Using SAP Query, transaction SQ01, users can define customized lists with little effort. Just check the desired fields and, optionally, provide information about the sorting and summation process. SAP Query is available in all releases of the Business Suite and also in the S/4HANA. This tutorial demonstrates how the results of an SAP query can additionally be displayed in a standard transaction using GUI-XT. The benefit to the user is that the information is immediately available and does not have to be called up in a new mode. Our example today will focus on the maintenance of payment transactions in the general data record of transaction XD02. In the Payment Transactions tab, there is an empty space at the bottom, and it is here that we want to display a table with GUI-XT. Let's create the table in WYSIWYG mode. Our goal is to display all disputed cases related to a particular customer. The table can be dragged to fill the space. Then we save the script, leave the WYSIWYG mode, and have a look at the data we want displayed in the table. This can be done via SAP Query SQ01. What pops up is an SAP standard evaluation with the query Dispute Cases in the user group GUI-XT already present. We execute dispute cases, enter the company code and customer number, run the query, and get an overview of all previous disputed cases, with the amount in dispute and the name of the case processor. This is the information we want for our new table. Going back to payment transactions, let's select the WYSIWYG mode and fill in the necessary fields. First, the table title, Dispute Cases. The internal name of our GUI-XT table variable, Disputes, and the column titles, which are the same as in the SAP Query. Case ID, date of the dispute, the reason for the dispute, the amount, currency, and case processor. For the internal names, we can choose any name that works for us. Now for the column widths. We could set all to 16 and then adjust later, or put in some values that experience tells us should work. We set all columns to fixed because we don't need a horizontal scroll bar, and set all columns to read only because we don't require data input. The table already looks pretty good. So we save, leave the WYSIWYG mode, and go to the next step in which we fill the table with the data from the SAP Query. The first step is to define a GUI-XT table variable called disputes. The columns of the table variable are the columns of the dispute table, using the corresponding internal names, ID, date, etc. With that, the table variable is defined. But let's delete the statement fixing the number of lines to be displayed, because we want the number of lines of the table variable to be flexible. The next step is code that executes the query dispute cases. For this, we define the variables query as dispute cases, and user group as GUI-XT. Using these definitions keeps the code general so that it can be used for other queries in the future. And now comes the crucial part. We call the module GUI-XT submit report, which belongs to GUI-XT utilities and can be downloaded from the Synactive website. We specify the name of the query with the values and the user group. This code is sufficient to run the query. However, we want to restrict the query to a specific company code and customer number. The same code is always used to pass parameters. Examples can be found in our documentation. If you use this code often, it might be useful to save it as a template in the script editor for quick access. We begin by creating a structure, something many of you are familiar with from the ABAP world. With cell name, kind, sign, option, low, and high. Then we create another table, because we want to pass two parameters. Starting with the company code, we need the technical name of the parameter here. For this, we save and call up SQO1 in a new mode. Execute the query, press F1 on the company code. This brings up the documentation where we click on Technical Information. Here we can see the name of the selection parameter, in this case fin book R. There are two fields for the selection interval, low and high. However, we only need one value. And for today, must remember fin book R. Pressing F1 for customer number, we can see that the selection criterion is fin KUNN. Going back to the script, we enter the selection names that we have identified. The other entries are always the same. S for kind, P would be parameter without interval, sign is I for inclusive, E would be exclusive, The option is EQ for equal. Other options are BT for interval and CP for contains pattern. For low field name, we could enter 3000, which is the company code for our example. However, it's more generally applicable to code the value of the field as company code. Having set all fields, we add the selection to our parameter table with append row. Duplicating the code, we adjust for customer number with selection name fin, KUNN, and low field name for customer. This parameter table is now passed on to the call of the GUI-XT submit report. However, we also want information back, namely the output data from the query transaction, which are delivered in CSV format, separated values, which actually uses a semicolon as its standard separator, with the option to define a different separator. For this to work, we must use createTable to create the output table as a table variable CVS data with the variable feld. That should be all we need to retrieve the data from the query. In order to test the code, let's output the CSV data in a message. Then we save and activate the script. The error message states that an exception condition was triggered and no data were outputted. The script editor indicates several errors. Square brackets are missing in several places. Save and activate again. That's better. The data in CSV format look plausible. But now we have to transfer the data to our table. Knowing how to transfer data in CSV format into a GUI-XT table variable can be useful in many situations. The easiest way to do this is to use a text variable and the copy text statement with from table equals CSV data to text equals temp. And from text equals temp to table equals disputes, with semicolon as the delimiter. Save, activate, and test. Nothing happened. In the script, we can see that again square brackets and V's are missing in from table and to table. Let's see if that fixes the problem. Yes, that looks good. The data have been passed on to the table. We can add the number of entries to the table title. Then the user can see immediately how many cases there are. This is the table attribute row count. And after executing, we can immediately see that there are 13 disputes in our example. Clicking on another tab, we can see that the table is also displayed here, and even blocks out some of the fields, which we definitely do not want. Because the GUI-XT script is valid for all screens, we have to query the tab for which we want to display the table. For the sake of completeness, we should first query the transaction, because the same screen might also be used in another transaction. For example, XD03, display customer, where our table may or may not be useful. For now, let's only query XD02, the tab or page payment transactions, and the field company code, because the tab payment transactions also can occur without company code as a reference. At the bottom, don't forget the end if, and the indentation formatting with pretty print, save, and activate. Now the table is visible on the Payment Transactions tab, but absent on all others. Let's select a different customer . That also looks good. For this customer, 395 disputed cases are displayed. You might notice that scrolling down the rows is quite slow because the entire query is run in response to every user action. In order to make the code more efficient, we can restrict the run to once per transaction call. The best way to do this is to use the system field transaction ID, which changes with each new transaction call. So if not equal, we execute the query again. The end if is placed after the query, but before the code for table display, because we always want the table to be shown. Pretty print, and activate. Now scrolling through the table and changing tabs is much faster because the query is executed only once for each transaction call. And that brings us to the end of our tutorial. Combining the SAP Query tool with GUI-XT provides the user with a useful overview table without having to call up the disputed cases evaluation in a new mode.